with a look at what's coming up. Egypt agrees to a $500 million fine over a gas dispute with an Israeli company. One of the most anticipated air shows takes off in Paris, France. And a Nigerian startup provides cold storage services to prevent food wastage in the country. Well, let's start off the show in Egypt. The government has approved a new small and medium enterprises law. It, of course, is aimed at facilitating procedures for those with micro businesses in the country. Here's Yasser Hakim once more with the details.
Ahmed Eid has a workshop to produce handmade cotton rugs, covers and decorations out of recycled material.
Everything here is handmade. I produce myself. I learned a trade from my father. The raw material is all waste from several cotton, clothes and textile factories. It's recycled. I dye it in different colors and produce different products according to clients' needs.
The workshop has been open for more than 10 years. Ahmed says he wants to expand and grow, but regulations have been hindering progress.
The demand is so high for my products not just in Cairo but in Sharm el Sheikh and Hag Ada. That's because we are only a few who are specialized in this. I wish to have a larger place with more equipment, manpower and materials. I can't because of the bureaucracy, taxes and cost. I can't take a loan because of stringent bank guarantees and procedures.
A new law approved by the government aims at solving these issues.
The lawmakers are aware of these many challenges. For the financing issue,
SMEs are the base for economic development and job creation, and the government hopes proposed facilities will encourage more people to establish small businesses.
To be included in the formal economy and help to support the budget deficit. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Well, let's stay in Egypt, where the government has announced that it reached a settlement agreement with state-owned Israel Electric Corporation to pay a reduced fine for halting deliveries of natural gas. Now, the latest accord will cut the fine to $500 million from $1.7 billion, ending a 7-year-old dispute. Israel Electric sued Egyptian state entities in 2015 after it broke a contract signed in 2005 to supply the fuel. The North African nation ultimately cancelled gas exports to Israel in 2012 after a section of a pipeline that connects the two countries was repeatedly attacked by militants. Now, Egypt will pay the fine over a period of about 8.5 years in exchange for the Israeli company to drop all other claims resulting from the arbitration decision. And on that note, let's take a look at our corporate headlines today. Nigeria's central bank says it will blacklist the bank accounts of firms caught smuggling or dumping any of the restricted goods into the country. In 2015, the Apex Bank curbed access to dollars for firms importing 43 items ranging from rice to private jets. Now, this is in a bid to conserve foreign reserves and diversify the economy of Africa's biggest crude oil producer. Meanwhile, Airtel Africa is targeting a valuation of up to $4 billion as it pushes ahead with a London listing. The group has set a price range of 80 to 100 pence per ordinary share for the IPO. Now, it is expected to sell nearly 595 million to 744 million shares to raise gross proceeds of approximately $750 million. That's, of course, including an over-allotment option. And tech giant Huawei CEO says that he expects U.S. sanctions to cause the company's revenue to drop by billions of dollars. The firm has disclosed that its revenue will drop to $100 billion this year, down from around $104 billion last year. Now, Huawei is currently embroiled in a trade dispute between the world's top two economies, China and the U.S. And finally, airline shares have suffered turbulent trading after German giant Lufthansa issued a shock profit warning. It did admit that its short-haul business had been hit by fierce competition. Now, the fall comes after the group lowered its profit outlook for the full year 2019, citing price competition from low-cost rivals in Europe. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we're heading into a quick break now. Do stay with us. We'll be right back.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Culinary. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Well, let's go back to one of our top stories of the day. Of course, Egypt has reached a settlement agreement with state-owned Israel Electric Corporation. That's to pay a reduced fine for halting deliveries of natural gas. Well, just a reminder once again of our top story. Egypt, of course, reached that settlement. And we are, of course, joined now by Yasser Hakim in Cairo with more on this story. Very glad to have you on the show, Yasser. Now, Yasser, give us a sense of the circumstances that, of course, led to Egypt's decision to end this almost 7-year-long gas dispute with Israel.
Yes, it's taking a long time. It has affected trade between both and investments between both. But obviously, the reason for that cut in the contract, or the contract was cancelled, the exports were cancelled by Egypt, is because of some security concerns, because of the after the 2011 uprising and the absence of security for a few years in Egypt after the uprising has led to militant attacks or extremism and extremist attacks and militias attacking the gas pipelines that have been linking Egypt to Israel, whereby Egypt was exporting gas to Israel. and these would always, and it happened a few times, would cut off all supplies of Egyptian gas to Israel. And these acts of sabotage has led Egypt to cancel the contract, especially that the public opinion in Egypt at that time found that there were some corruption issues concerning the deal, the contract that was signed with Israel, but the corruption cases concerning Egyptian officials or businessmen related to the contract. And therefore it was cancelled from Egyptian side, but obviously Israel has called for compensation of $1.8 billion. And after those 7 years of negotiations, they agreed on a $500 million payment that Egypt would pay to Israel over 8.5 years. And this obviously comes after the huge gas deals and gas reserves that have been found in Egypt and discovered along the Red Sea and the Mediterranean Sea as well, and the prospects of a lot of investments to come in this sector. So it was a time for both sides to agree on a deal, on an agreement and a compensation so that they can go forward with other deals.
Right, yeah. So now because of this dispute, some deals between the two countries were put on hold. Of course, we know about the plan to import gas from Israel to be liquefied in Egyptian LNG plants and then re-exported. What happens to deals such as these going forward?
Yes, according to a statement that came from both sides, that this deal will now be on. It has been on hold because of the dispute that we just talked about. And now, this year or 2019, we expect that this deal to Egypt to import gas from Israel and then to go through a liquefied gas plants in Egypt, the LNG, and to be re-exported. And we're talking about $15 billion a year, and that's a huge contract that was on hold. And now both sides are saying that it will be on track in 2019 and 2020, and it will open up a lot of potential for exporting gas to the region, not just between Egypt and Israel, but to other countries in the region, in Europe and the Middle East, that will be in need of this gas for energy.
Now, Yasser, we do know this dispute, it did cause some friction between the two countries. Does this settlement now signify a smoothening of relations between the two countries? And could that mean more new deals in the pipeline?
If we're talking economically, yes, it will smooth now relations. And we're talking about other investment deals between Egypt and Israel, especially in the energy sector. But obviously politics is another story, and the tensions, especially concerning the Palestinian question and the Palestinian issue and peace in the Middle East, obviously tensions will remain and differences will remain between Egypt and Israel. However, on the economic side, there obviously has been some kind of separation between both, and the economic deals are expected to continue, especially in the energy sector. That's where both sides are cooperating on a bigger scale than other sectors in the economy.
Well, we'll certainly be watching. Many thanks, Yasser, for your insights. Of course, that's Yasser Akim joining us there in Cairo. Well, let's shift focus now. Kenyans had mixed views on that $3 billion budget presented by Treasury last week, especially the fact that once again a huge chunk of the budget will go to recurrent expenditure. Now, a new proposition has especially angered informal motorcycle taxis in the country. Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich has proposed to amend the insurance rules to require all passenger-carrying motorcycle taxis, or boda bodas as they're called here, to have insurance cover for passengers and pedestrians. The move is meant to aid in providing financial assistance for victims of the motorcycle accidents, which of course are quite common on Kenyan roads. Well, let's find out more about how Kenya's insurance sector will approach this new legislation. We're joined by CEO of insurance firm Jubilee Holdings, Dr. Julius Kipngetich. Very great to have you on the show, sir.
Thank you.
Now, of course, we know this new bill has raised huge questions, of course, around how it'll be enforced, given that, of course, the motorcycle or boda boda sector is largely informal. Now, as an insurance firm, give us some sense of how you're going to approach this in terms of organizing payments and, of course, the risk that it poses to insurance firms in the country.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. I think The first thing we need to understand is the scope of the border sector. As we speak now, there are around 1 million of them,
Right.
and they are growing very fast, probably at a rate of between 5 to 10% year on year. As we speak now, only 40% of them are insured, which is a challenge, which means 60% are not insured by law. And then on top of that, the insurance is just restricted it to the property itself and they themselves. But most of them have been turned into means of transport over the years. In fact, as we speak now, for the lower end of the market, the borders are the most popular means of transport. Now, as a result, many of them have put their passengers at risk. If you look at public hospitals in Kenya today, there are special wards for accidents as a result of borders. And most of them are fractures because most of them don't have helmets, then they have broken limbs, and that is where the challenge is. Right. So the finance minister is bringing into the bracket of insurance this sector which previously had avoided it. Now, the insurance industry has always been ready. The only challenge in this sector is that they are not organized. So we are having discussions with the National Transport and Safety Authority to organize them into savings and credit societies, what we call in Kenya SACCOs. And Kenya has very popular SACCOs in Africa. So we are going to organize them into SACCOs so that then they have a register so that it's easy to track them, because as we speak now, it's more or less a lawless group. And so therefore, the insurance industry is gearing itself to giving them proper insurance. It's going to be difficult at the beginning. Reason why is because it's a sort of, as you said, very informal, and we must formalize it so that then it's insured, so that then we cannot put public passengers at risk. Yes.
But are insurance firms in Kenya keen on taking on this market? Give us a sense of whether they're likely to contribute to high loss ratios in insurance firms. Of course, insurance firms in Kenya are currently seeing a high loss ratio when it comes to the motor insurance business. So are insurance firms rushing to include them?
What I can say is that we have no choice.
Right.
If you look at insurance companies, the formal market is largely saturated now, and it must move as a way of expanding and increasing the customer base into the SME. And this falls squarely in the small and medium enterprises. So therefore, we as insurance companies must find a formula. Right. Now, in the past, the insurance industry, when they're insuring motor, creates a motor pool. And what kills the motor pool is corruption. So the poison in our system that we must all address collectively is corruption. Once we are able to deal with taking the lead, and through the regulator, it's a profitable thing. And so therefore, once we remove corruption and we organize the market, it's easy to estimate the risk. And I believe that this is a risk worth taking by the insurance industry.
We'll discuss that corruption a little bit more, but first, very quickly, how are insurance firms in Kenya including the SMEs into their business? Do you have the products for them right now?
Yes, right. The regulators approved. If you look at the register of the regulators, approved some SME products in largely many areas, in medical, in motor, in home insurance. All that is already beginning to happen, because insurance penetration in Kenya is only 2.7%. We can double it in the next 5 years if we now go into the SME space, because largely it has just rotated around the formal economy, people with salaries, and that space is largely exhausted now. So we must go in the SME space. The special thing about the SME space is that typically an SME person compared to a formal person earns double the salary, and they are 4 times the number in terms of quantum. So it's a very large market. The only challenge, it's not formalized, and they don't receive a regular income. If we sort out now how to ensure people don't receive a regular income by just being creative in the way they pay their premiums. And that's one thing we have discussed with the regulator, and we will have some way of getting the premiums in a regular way and serving them by covering them under risk. One of the things that we need to understand, largely much of Africa, is that risk mitigation exists in the economy.
Right.
It's just that it's not the way we in the insurance industry approach that risk. So we are very formal in the way we approach the risk. But if you look at once a risk occurs, how do people deal with it? In Kenya, they use what we call a rambe.
Okay.
So in fact, if you look at most of these accidents that occur, when it does happen, people just pull their resources.
Right.
And so we are asking them, why don't you do it beforehand? Take an insurance cover so that then you don't have to call your friends and burden the community by raising money after the event. And that is really the approach we are taking now.
Now let's address this issue of corruption in the sector. We know the new Insurance Act, it aimed to sort of, tackle some of the issues in that area. We know President Kenyatta actually declined to sign some of those changes into law. So what are you expecting? What do you hope to see from that new law?
What I can say about the corruption issue, it's a sad issue in the insurance industry globally, but even here in Kenya. On average, 40% of insurance claims are fraudulent. And a lot of effort now is going towards making sure that these claims are well vetted, are looked at into by experts, so that then we pay genuine claims and we weed out fraudulent claims.
Right.
One of the measures we are taking as Jubilee is to share information about fraudsters. We are going to be open about it so that then we can warn others about that this problem is serious and we can do something about it. Then coming to what you are saying, what the president did. For a long time, intermediaries, the brokers and agents have been keeping money so that then the premiums don't reach the underwriter on time. So what the president sought to cure was let this money go straight to the underwriter, and then the underwriter pays the intermediaries, the broker and the agent from that pool, so that then it is quick. Because many people have lost their policies because the money never reached the underwriter. So what happened last year is Parliament amended the president's proposal, the original proposal, and so when it reached the president for signing, the president rejected and returned the bill to Parliament and said, I propose that the bill be read in the original format. I believe Parliament will not go against the president, and that will improve access by the underwriters to the money, and so therefore they can process the claims faster. So it's a way, yes, I agree with you, of addressing the corruption issue, because if somebody is holding the money and not reaching the underwriter, you can say it's a form of corruption.
Right. Yes. That's true. Now, very quickly, before we go, I'd like to get your take on the winners and losers looking at this year's budget. We know Kenya's private sector, they've complained quite a lot about this budget. They argue that the government is making the operating environment for private sector companies tougher right now. Now, you're, of course, the former CEO of one of Kenya's retail giants, Uchumi. It is limping today, and that's happening to a lot of companies in Kenya. So what are your thoughts on today's environment, business environment, and is it conducive?
What I can say is that we have one of the most efficient tax systems in Africa, which is a good thing. I think the challenge in Kenya is how the tax is used.
Right.
Okay, and a lot of Kenyans pay twice for the services. We pay tax. So I think the greatest complaint by many Kenyans is the government using our taxes efficiently. I don't think it's about the quantum. Now it needs to focus is, one, tax administration. Are we collecting the taxes due? And then also efficiency of the public service in the way it uses taxes so that the public can benefit.
Right. Well, unfortunately, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us in the studio. Of course, that was Dr. Julius Kipngetich. He is the CEO of Jubilee Holdings here in Kenya. Well, let's move on now. A new generation of recent university graduates is turning to entrepreneurship in Ghana. They say the best way to get a job is to make your own. Well, CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai met with some of them at a trade exhibition in Accra.
Iraja Oponkwansa is showcasing her locally made beauty products and learning how to boost her brand. She started her own company after finding it difficult to get a job when she graduated from university last year. Share Fresh Naturals is just 6 months old, and its founder says she has a lot to learn.
I see my brand to be something new, so it's really difficult to convince people because how can you say this is body butter made of shea butter? People don't really get your concept.
Okoronkwo's difficulty finding work is not unusual. Recent reports show youth unemployment in Ghana at over 13%, and it often takes university graduates as many as 10 years to secure a job. Entrepreneurship is one way to fix that for the founders of these businesses, as well as the people they may eventually hire.
We hope people get to understand the value of our fabrics so that they accept products that are made with African print. Because when they do that, the company will grow and we will end up employing more people.
Organizers of the Ghana Trade Exhibition believe supporting startups can help reduce unemployment in the country.
We pretty much want to create a network of startup companies and medium-sized firms so we can help all these brands to grow. Our goal is to have these events 2 times every year, every June and December.
Many of the startups here say they need a cash injection to boost business, but securing soft loans from the banks isn't easy, which is why they are calling on the government to set up a fund to support young entrepreneurs. The government last year announced it will allocate $5.5 million to train 2,000 young entrepreneurs across the country beginning March of this year. Like many of the entrepreneurs here, Okoronkwo says she has yet to benefit from the training, but she is determined to learn what she needs to make her locally made beauty products a thriving business that offers jobs to others. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's head into a quick break now, still to come. One of the most anticipated air shows takes off in France. And Peru boosts its funds to preserve the Amazon rainforest.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
At 1:30, let's recap today's headlines. Former Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi has died in court after the conclusion of a trial session in the espionage lawsuit. Now, Morsi, a top figure in the Muslim Brotherhood, was toppled by the military in 2013 at a mass protest against his rule. He had been serving a 7-year sentence for falsifying his candidacy application for the 2012 presidential race. And in northeast Nigeria, at least 30 people have died following a triple suicide bombing attack in Borno State. Over 40 others have been injured in the bomb blast. The attacks took place Sunday evening in Konduga village. The 3 suicide bombers detonated their devices as people watched a football match at a viewing center. And finally, Libya's tribal leaders, parliamentarians and politicians from east and west of the country have gathered in Cairo. They are seeking a unified stance on the ongoing conflict in Libya. This comes as efforts by the international community to bring an end to the conflict continue. And that's a recap of today's headlines. Now, aeronautics company Airbus has unveiled its long-range version of its A321neo jet at the Paris Air Show. The European firm aims to carve out new routes for airlines and compete with Boeing's plans for a possible new mid-market jet. The fleet is the longest-range narrow-body jetliner, which will maximize the airline's flexibility and its efficiency. Now, the annual Paris Air Show is traditionally a match between Airbus and Boeing sales teams in the $150 billion a year commercial aircraft market.
This is the A321 XLR, ladies and gentlemen. It is an aircraft capable of 4,700 nautical miles of range in a typical longer range configuration. That would be two-class configuration. It is therefore, by definition, for ranges like this, the lowest risk investment deployment for an airline opening new routes in that sector range.
Now, of course, the Paris Air Show, which is a biennial event, is the largest aerospace gathering in the world. This year, however, concerns over trade wars, air safety and weakening demand are casting a shadow over the event. Take a look.
Here is the Paris Air Show, the biggest of its kind in the $150 billion commercial aircraft industry. It came as many analysts are saying that the sector is entering a slowdown due to global trade tensions, Boeing safety scandals, and a growing environmental protest movement in Europe. So now the players are turning to new technologies to improve how they design and manufacture. Electronic propulsions, 3D printing, and artificial intelligence are all being fleshed out.
Both Airbus and Boeing, to name two companies, are looking at how they can improve their products and use new technologies to be able to be more environmentally sound in terms of the emissions from aircraft, for instance.
And analysts believe that market demand will still grow, even for U.S. planemaker Boeing, which has been overshadowed by two fatal crashes and the global grounding of its 737 MAX jets.
I think Airbus and Boeing are both sitting in an industry which is continuing to show strong growth. If we look at what's driving kind of passenger growth, it's coming out of Asia and to some degree the Middle East, and there seems to be no signs of that slowing down. Every year, the revenue passenger miles continues to go up. And so for both those companies, as they position their products, for that increasing demand, it's going to be important that they make the right presence here known.
The Paris Air Show will run until Saturday.
Great to have you on the show, Stefan. Now, of course, all eyes are on Boeing this year. And of course, how the firm is planning to get its troubled 737 MAX aircraft back in the air going forward. What are the expectations, Stefan? And what have you seen so far at the air show?
Well, the expectations of Boeing are not very high, I must say. The CEO, Dennis Muilenburg, he will attend the Paris Air Show because, of course, this is the largest gathering of its kind in the world. And it's a very important moment to connect with the clients, but also with the media. So he will have a lot of work to do to explain what exactly went wrong. We should not forget that the Boeing 737 MAX is still grounded. The causes of the accidents earlier this year and last year are still not known, nor are the solutions. So Muilenburg will face probably a very tough audience in the next couple of days in Paris. And of course, the image of Boeing, one of the world's largest airplane manufacturers, is severely damaged. So there's a lot of work to do for Boeing in Paris this week.
And of course, Boeing is Airbus is Boeing's biggest competitor. We did see change single aisle airline flagship A380 plane. So far, we've already heard it has received orders. What did we see from the firm so far?
Well, today on the first day of the air show in Paris, Airbus sold over 110 aeroplanes to 3 different companies, mixed orders from several different airplanes. But they also expect to sell more than 200 items of their newest airplane, the A321, this week. So they will have a very good week. But they are also in troubled waters because they are subject to a corruption probe in the United States, in Great Britain and here in France. So they also have to be, they can of course announce their major orders, but they will have to stay a bit, let's say, discreet on the way they are advertising their success, because it's always a battle, of course, between Airbus and Boeing, the 2 largest aeroplane manufacturers in the world. But this time, both of them are seeing dark clouds above them.
Quite right. And actually, speculation has been that the mood at this year's air show will be quite gloomy, given, of course, as you mentioned, the slowdown in the commercial aircraft industry, trade tensions, struggling economies, what's happening with Boeing, as well as, of course, the financial impact on airliners. Is this what you've seen so far, a gloomy showing at this year's air show?
Yes, although it was a very sunny and hot day today here in Paris, it is true that the mood was not very optimistic. Of course, there are many uncertainties about the future of the world's economy with the looming trade wars, insecurity in the Gulf. So it's not looking good for the airplane manufacturers. So many people were not very optimistic. Some experts, though, I've spoken to today, they said, well, maybe in Europe and the United States we will sell less planes, people will take less trips with airplanes, but you should not forget the rising middle class in Asia, which probably will make up from the decrease in the airplane sales in Europe. So, but they're not very optimistic. Nevertheless, there's still always a silver lining in the clouds here in Paris.
Well, we'll certainly be watching. Many thanks, Stefan, for that update. Of course, that was Stefan Devry. He's joining us there in Paris. Well, moving on now, more than 600 companies are urging U.S. President Donald Trump to resolve the trade dispute with China. They say tariffs are hurting American businesses and consumers. Now, they signed a letter to Trump on Thursday, just the latest of many sent by a national campaign group, which is known as Tariffs Hurt the Heartland. That's in quotes. Now, the tariffs are also expected to impact many Chinese companies operating in the U.S. Here's CGTN's Dan Williams reporting.
A brand new $100 million manufacturing plant has just opened on the outskirts of Chicago, and soon it will have a major impact on the city's commuters.
A one-person seat.
This is the next generation of Chicago Transit Authority rail cars, produced by Chinese company CRRC. The company won the contract to produce 846 rail cars in 2016. These will be the first rail cars produced in Chicago since 1964. But the ongoing trade dispute between the US and China threatens to undermine the project after the US imposed tariffs on Chinese imports.
The trade impact is, is many-fold actually, but some of the legislation, for example, that's being considered in Washington would have a definite impact on the workers that we've hired here. We want to make the rail cars here, we want to make them by the people that live here, and we want the components to come from people from the United States as well.
I'm here. Am I in? The potential impact has been cushioned, with the company sourcing more than 70% of the components required to build the rail cars within the US. Some politicians remain concerned that the rail cars could pose a security risk as they are produced by a Chinese state-owned company. Those concerns are unfounded, according to CRRC.
It's fears that are sort of being put out there into the atmosphere based on no facts. The hope is that now that CRRC has been very transparent with what it's doing, that legislators and folks across the nation realize that the message that was put out previously was an inaccurate one.
The priority is to build 10 rail cars by October, allowing the CTA to test them for a year before the company moves into full production.
One of the key elements of this operation is the collaboration between China and US workers, with many of the US workers here having already undergone an intensive training program in China.
The training has continued in Chicago under the guidance of Chinese masters. In time, the workforce will be entirely American, providing some 170 manufacturing, warehouse and professional jobs. Roberto Rios is part of the assembly team. He's excited by the future prospects of the operation.
I truly believe that once we get rolling, they're going to see what kind of product we're making. Everybody here is going to be very prideful in what we're doing. So we want to put our best work forward and get many contracts and put out a good product.
Beyond Chicago, CRRC hopes to win further contracts across the US. Although some politicians still need winning over, these American workers feel they are already on the right track. Dan Williams, CGTN, Chicago.
Now, the 17th of June marks World Day to combat desertification and drought, which of course seeks to promote a public awareness around the issue and efforts to combat it. Now, according to the United Nations, by 2025, about 1.8 billion people will experience absolute water scarcity, and 2/3 of the world will be living under water stress conditions. Now, many parts of India are facing severe drought and water scarcity. CGTN's Ravinder Bawa tells us how Indians are dealing with the extreme situation.
Godavari struggles every day to collect water for her family from this almost drying well. Her village in the central Indian district of Beed is facing the worst water scarcity. Since all the wells and ponds in her village have dried, she has to trek more than 2 kilometers to fetch water. She says the load on her head weighs more than her. Just 10 days back, she came down with fever and body ache due to fatigue.
The road isn't good as it is being built. I don't get time to study. I don't get time to play. I have to bring water 3 times a day. I'm scared of falling into the well.
The only source of water is a nearby dam in these areas. In parched villages, people are forced to drink untreated water supplied by tankers. Mostly the women carry and collect water in drought-hit areas. Irregular and scarce rainfall has dried most water sources in these regions. The government is also providing fodder and water for animals in 300 such cattle camps. With no water in many villages, thousands of farmers have also moved into these camps. They are the worst hit as this drought has forced them to become refugees. Farmers are struggling the most in these drought-stricken regions. Dilip Bhushan Rao has seen 3 crop failures. He says if it does not rain this year, he will also be forced to migrate to another place for livelihood.
We have no other means of income. All we have is farming. Farming is the only livelihood for us, so we can't look after the family. It is very difficult.
To address this water emergency, the government is now prioritizing water management initiatives.
Under Jal Shivar Abhiyan, we make, rejuvenate, rebuild our small water storage structure.
People here have realized that water is life. While they wait for rains to arrive, they also know that there are no quick fix solutions to this water crisis. Ravinder Bawa, CGTN, Beed, India.
Now, on that note, let's take a look at how commodities performed today. Gold prices slipping further today, and that's following upbeat U.S. economic data that, of course, dampened expectations that we will see the U.S. Fed ease interest rates going forward. Meanwhile, oil prices continue to head south on fears that trade disputes will dent global oil demand. Of course, news from the International Energy Agency that global oil supplies will increase far more than demand in 2020, with, of course, the start of a host of new projects put further pressure on oil prices today. Well, as we head into a short break now, here's a look at what's still to come. A Nigerian startup provides cold storage services to prevent food wastage. And Kenyan poultry farmers turn to an unlikely source to improve their yields.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
And we go to Nigeria now, where a startup is providing cold storage services to market traders and small-scale farmers in the country. In Nigeria, over 30% of food produced goes to waste because of inefficient harvesting, storage, processing, and time to market. Well, CGTN's Brian Toussaint shows us how the company is helping prevent food wastage in the country.
Relief Market is one of the main markets in Owerri, Nigeria. Traders operating here mostly sell fruits and vegetables. However, they often suffer losses due to lack of proper storage facilities for the abundant supply.
We used to have a lot of damages. We don't have a place to preserve these things. We pack them in the packing shops, and then within 2-3 days the thing gets spoiled, and we have a lot of losses. But now that the cold room is available, we can quickly go there and keep our goods, and we don't have much loss again.
Cold Hubs has set out to provide solar-powered cold rooms for those who want to keep their produce fresh. These solar panels, fitted on the refrigerator roofs, provide energy that is used to power the cold room.
Something stood out from each community we visited: the inability of smallholder farmers to store their perishable food, especially fruit and vegetables, and also related to several root and tuber crops, And in the course of our traveling, we met and interacted with a lot of farmers, and we asked them a lot of questions, whether they will be able to pay for a small service if we provide cold storage facilities within their farms, in their markets, or very nearby, close to them.
Such agricultural investments have been encouraged by the government to push for creation of jobs and boost food security. 30% of locally produced food has been discarded over time due to inefficient harvesting, storage, and processing.
I thank God because they are not charging me more than 100 naira a day. It is 100 naira they are collecting daily. And I thank God for that, sir. Because before that, I'm not keeping it there. Before that day, I can lose more than 500 naira for doing that is spoiling.
The impact is huge. In 2018, Cold Hubs was able to save more than 12,000 tons of food from spoilage. This is the amount of food that was stored inside the cold room that should actually be spoiled. This is typically food that farmers, retailers, and wholesalers lose every now and then. Cold Hubs has been able to, increase the income of smallholder farmers, from about $60 every month to about $120 every month, simply by eliminating food spoilage.
The company has over 11 cold rooms across 7 states in the country. In efforts to push its agenda, it is also working to educate farmers on the importance of effective food storage. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
And in Côte d'Ivoire, the first Pan-African Culinary Training Center has recently opened. The Ivorian French chef behind the initiative is serving up contemporary flavors and history lessons based on various African cuisines. Here's CGTN's Daniela Pearson reporting.
At the PanAfrican Culinary Institute in Abidjan, Chef Luc Dablé is teaching a group of students how to create the day's menu. Côte d'Ivoire's very first Pan-African cooking school also doubles up as a restaurant. But for Dablé, the history of each dish is just as important as its taste.
African cuisine needs to be recognized and celebrated. We have a lot of work to do when it comes to documenting our own cuisine and especially in telling our stories. We should tell our own stories. We should not let others interpret our culture or our history.
Dablé spent years honing his skills abroad at international hotels and restaurants. Now, the French-Ivorian chef has returned home to fulfill a dream. His philosophy is simple: to make African cuisine accessible and to teach people what makes it unique.
This place is not only a food lab but also a place where we explore the different culinary identities of Africa and the diaspora. What we all know is that there is no one general African cuisine. African cuisine does not exist, but rather African cuisines, and beyond that, we also show how the African continent has influenced other continents when it comes to cuisines.
Over the course of 6 months, aspiring chefs will learn about cooking and managing a kitchen. Every month, the students focus on a different theme. They learn about the history of African food and serve a variety of healthy African dishes, but with a modern twist.
For me, it's a discovery. I had forgotten a lot of African dishes, and now I am immersing myself in the African culinary universe, so it's a great advantage.
We really like the food that we were given. It's African cuisine reimagined. This place feels cosmopolitan and brings back memories like those from childhood. We enjoyed our time.
Chef Dablé says there's still a long way to go in terms of educating Africans about the need to use homegrown ingredients and recipes. He has also set up a foundation that trains youth and women to help reduce the growing unemployment rates. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
And in Kenya, poultry farmers are turning to unorthodox solutions for better yields. As the world looks to feed about 10 billion mouths by 2050, insect farms are seen as a greener alternative to traditional livestock. And that's because they use far less water and release less greenhouse gas per gram of proteins. Here's CGTN's Alexandria Majala with more.
Victor Chalo's chickens have doubled the number of eggs they are laying. The reason? Human excrement. The Kenyan farmer is feeding them food from a Nairobi-based organics recycling company called Synergy.
Before, the feed I was using before, it was not good to the chickens. The production was low. Many of the hens were dying. But after using the new unified feed, the chickens' production has increased and they've become stronger.
Synergy was started 8 years ago to help deal with sanitation. The waste management franchise provides more than 2,500 toilets to 100,000 people daily. In emerging economies like Kenya, the World Bank says nearly 2/3 of urbanites live in slums. Feeding waste to fly larvae could help solve both sanitation and nutrition problems. Lilian Busia runs one of Synergy's franchises, charging residents of Mukuru Kwaruben slum in the south of the city 5 US cents to use her blue Fresh Life toilets.
These latrines have helped the community a lot because before, people used to use flying toilets. The toilets were scarce. Now Fresh Life has installed these latrines and it's much cleaner. They are evenly distributed and one can access the toilet anywhere, anytime. Not like before.
According to the Nairobi City Water and Sewerage Company, feces from more than 2/3 of Nairobi's inhabitants go untreated because there are not enough toilets. Many others are not cleaned out regularly. Sanergy feeds the waste it collects to fly larvae, which in turn become high-quality animal feed.
So basically, this process is able to reduce the amount of waste coming in by 70% within 10 days. So if you have, for argument's sake, 100 tons coming into the process, after feeding them to black soldier flies, that volume reduces to 30 tons within 10 days. Yeah? And that's a very, very powerful way of helping solve the waste reduction problem.
In 10 days, the larvae munch their way through most of the waste, leaving behind manure laden with nitrogen and calcium, which becomes organic fertilizer. The plump white larvae are boiled in hot water to kill off pathogens. The protein-rich larvae are then sold to animal feed millers, who grind them into powder mixed with other ingredients to create a balanced diet for poultry, pigs, and fish. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Well, before we close, here's a quick look at how Africa's currencies performed today. Now, emerging market currencies, we saw them trading in narrow ranges against the dollar, and that's ahead of the start of the US Fed's keenly anticipated meeting. MSCI's emerging market currency index dipped about 0.1% on the day. Meanwhile, Kenya shilling weakening against the dollar. That's due to excess liquidity in the money markets and, of course, dollar demand from oil and merchandise importers. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.